organizing and reaching out. Okay, so I assume that everybody can hear me okay?
Great.
Okay. So as you can see, the title of my lecture is Moral Enhancement Chips and the Slaughter of the Yetzer Hara. This is the topic that we will get into, the core topic. There's a lot of background that I need to give you. So we're going to start with talking about two movements that really encompass these kinds of science fiction, futuristic changes that are being brought to basically medical interventions. And that's why I believe that this talk is so relevant at a medical ethics conference. So the two, you could call them areas of R&D development. One is transhumanism, the other is posthumanism. Transhumanism is basically a combination of transitional human, the belief that humans can transform the human species by means of technology. And posthumanism is basically the next frontier following transhumanism. It's the liberation of humans from biological existence to a new eternal substrate where we can live out for eternity. So now, before you go and say, oh my God, this is like complete crackpot science, these things have been talked about by serious thinkers for a long time. The term was coined back in 1957 by Julian Huxley. He's the brother of the famous Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World. Other people have been involved in the movement. Marvin Minsky, who's one of the founding fathers of artificial intelligence back in the 50s. In 1980, he applied AI to transhumanism, meaning we will use AI to make people stronger, better, faster, smarter. And then finally, I think the greatest proponent of this movement is Ray Kurzweil. For those of you who aren't familiar with him, he's a great thinker. He's put together all kinds of inventions and innovations. He's currently the thinker on AI at Google. And there are many other faces and names. They've all written books on the subject. And this is really just a partial picture of what's going on in this field. Just to make sure that you understand that this isn't just a bunch of crackpots or one-off minority opinion people working on this. There are tens of institutions around the world that are working on these ideas. The Singularity University, which was put together by Ray Kurzweil, is funded by Google and NASA. Elon Musk has opened a company called Neuralink, where he has already implanted chips in people's brains. And if you look at it, I mean, it's called Humanity Plus. Their motto is elevating the human condition. In Jewish terms, we would call this tikkun olam. So really, I mean, they're doing things that are positive. The question is, are there any downsides to all of this science fiction that is really becoming real science today? So that's what I'd like to talk about, a little bit of history. So there's this thing called the technological singularity. Ray Kurzweil wrote a book about it called The Singularity is Near. He republished one, or I should say an advanced version that's called The Singularity is Nearer. The singularity basically refers to a point on a timeline. If we look at the y-axis, it's computing power. The x-axis is time. Human intelligence has grown gradually throughout history. Machine intelligence, starting with the first commercial computer in 1951, has grown exponentially. The belief is that by 2023, this was already a prediction, I believe it's already been fulfilled, we will have a computer that can work at the power of a human brain. The prediction is that by 2045, we will reach computers that will be able to have the brain power of all human beings on Earth combined. And that power will allow what they call an intelligence explosion, because the machines will now design themselves and the sky is the limit, as they say. So now, what does that really mean for us, this singularity? So it really divides history into 2 points, the before 2045 and after 2045. And I put this cover of Time magazine here just to show you that already in 2011, they were talking about this singularity happening in 2045. This isn't, again, some kind of sci-fi crackpot stuff. This is mainstream understandings of how technology is going to move forward and change at the singularity. Before the singularity, so they call this the transhuman period, and after the singularity is the post-human period. So now let's try and understand, what does that really mean? So we start with transhumanism. So transhumanism is really already here. It refers, as I said before, integrating technology into humans, what are called cyborgs. Cyborg is just a concatenation of cybernetics, which is a fancy word for technology and digital technology, and orgs is a short for organisms like us. We've already been developing all kinds of cyborg type of technology, cochlear implants, retinal implants, and now there are neural implants. This guy, Neil Harbison, has been noted as the first true cyborg. He implanted in himself this antenna that you see here. He did this already over a decade ago. He gets Wi-Fi, he gets television, radio, all kinds of audio signals, and it all is processed in a chip that then delivers the information to his brain. And if we're talking about neural implants, so that's where it really starts getting interesting. Already in 2014, we had headlines like this: U.S. scientists push ahead with memory-boosting brain implants. And then in 2019, there were headlines like, "Are brain implants the future of thinking? We can add chips that not only will add to our memory, they'll add to our cognitive capabilities." And then Elon Musk, as I mentioned just a year ago, January 2024, successfully implanted a chip in a human brain. I think he's already done a few more. And so that really begins to beg the question, what is the ethics of using brain implants to upgrade yourself? This is a huge question that's being dealt with by philosophers, ethicists, and rabbinical thinkers already for a long time. And this, before we get to those kind of questions, I want to say that it's also being framed as apocalyptic AI. What is apocalyptic AI? So transhumanism articulates fantasies that act as a secular answer to the eschatological aspirations of traditional religions. Basically, what that is saying is that we all have these ideas of what's going to happen in Yetzer Yamim. In the end of days, there's the Mashiach, there's people that are perfected, the Goyim will stop bothering us, we'll learn Torah. There's all kinds of visions, the resurrection of the dead, etc., etc. So what these people are saying, like this guy, Robert Gerassian, there's many people that are writing about apocalyptic AI. They're saying that AI is bringing about these religious visions of the end of times. So I want to sort of put all of that into this context of what we're talking about. And let's look at what do we say about the end of times. So there are many texts. I think that the most critical for one is what I took the title of this lecture from. It's a Gemara in Sukkah, Daf Nun Bet Amud Aleph, Kedirash Rebbe Yehuda. La'atid lavo mevio hakadosh baruch hu Yetzer Hara v'shochato. In the end of days, God is going to bring the Yetzer Hara, and he's going to slaughter it. There are many other texts that talk about this end of times where there won't be a Yetzer Hara, where people will be perfected, whether it's in the Meiri or kind of in the Rambam. In any case, there is this idea of getting rid of the Yetzer Hara, and there's this idea of implanting brain chips to make us better people. How do these two align? So, first of all, let's go back to the philosopher's approach to moral or behavioral enhancements. And there's a big question about, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? If we take just one example, which is anger, we can all agree that anger is bad. I bring for you the Rambam in Hilchot Deot that talks about how bad anger is. As we all are, I imagine we're all familiar with that the Rambam adopts Aristotle's golden mean. With all of our moral dispositions, we should seek the golden mean, the middle ground, except in a few midot, like anger. V'yesh deot, which are really midot, she'asur lo le'adam linhog bahem bebenonit, וכן הכעס מידה רעה היא עד למאוד, וראוי לאדם שירחיק ממנו עד הקצה האחר, כאילו עובד עבודת כוכבים. So the Rambam says, he's quoting the Gemara there, that basically anger is so bad that we need to completely dispossess ourselves of it. Anybody who is angry is like idol worshiping, which of course is one of the three cardinal sins, and you practically can't give a worse parallel to any kind of activity than avodah zarah. It's basically denying God. So if we could have a chip that every time we were going to get angry stopped us from getting angry, wouldn't that be a good thing? If not, why wouldn't it be? So I'll bring you what the philosophers say, and then we'll talk about what the rabbis say. So there's a lot of discussion. This is really just a sampling of the philosophers that talk about it. They say like this. This is an article from Thomas Douglas called Moral Enhancement. There's objections. People say this is not the right way to improve yourself. You should use natural means, self-education, anger management, meditation, therapy. But then Thomas Douglas says, yeah, but what if none of those things work? So if they don't work, you tried them. So why should not natural means be shunned? Then then people will say, no, but that changes completely who you are. You become a different person. So Thomas Douglas says, yeah, but that's the better person that I want to be. And then they say, yeah, but it could lead to bad outcomes. So he answers, no, but not being angry is going to be good for you and for everybody around you. So then people say, no, but your motives are wrong. You're not accepting yourself. It's an excessive desire to change. You should accept yourself. So Douglas says, no, you're supposed to accept the good things and improve the bad things. And so getting rid of anger would be something that you would want to not accept. And finally, people say, no, but now this will restrict your freedom because you've got this chip that's constantly forcing you to not be angry. So Douglas answers and he says, no, but now I'm going to have more freedom because I'm not an angry person that's constantly getting into fights. So anyway, this is some of it's only some of the back and forth that goes on in the philosophy world. But let's take a look at the Jewish world. So I bring for you probably one of the best well-known sources about that we are supposed to improve ourselves. It's a Midrash Tanchuma where Turnus Rufus Harasha meets Rabbi Akiva, and he says, Eza ma'asim na'im shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu o shel basar v'dam. Amar le shel basar v'dam na'im. So Turnus Rufus, the wicked, came to Rabbi Akiva. He wants to bother him about that we shouldn't be doing Brit Milah, and he says, what's better, the acts of God or the acts of people? So now he expects, of course, you're going to say the acts of God. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, the acts of man. So then Turnus Rufus, as it were, ignores that and says, why are you doing Brit Milah, right? If God wanted you to have Brit Milah, so you would have been born mahul, you would have born already circumcised. So then Rabbi Akiva answers him and says, Heviu li shibolim v'gluskaot. Bring me wheat sheaves and bring me bread. What is better? Obviously, the bread that's been processed by man, you can't eat wheat sheaves. So then he says, Haviu li anutzei pishtan v'kelim begadim bebeit sha'an. He says, bring me linen flowers, whatever, linen bush, and bring me linen garments. What is better? Obviously, the clothes that I can wear. And so at the end, Turnus Rufus says, if God really wanted people to be circumcised, why didn't he make them like that? And so Rabbi Akiva says, God didn't make everybody exactly like they want. You cut the umbilical cord. You don't leave it there. God made you with an umbilical cord. Ben lama eno yotze mahul. And why don't boys come out circumcised already? Lefi shelo natan HaKadosh Baruch Hu liYisrael et hamitzvot ela kadei letzaref bahem. God gave us the mitzvot in order to refine us, in order that we should be perfected through them. And so basically what the upshot of this is that we need to do everything, including changing our physical makeup, in order to become better people. If that's not enough, there's the Bereshit Rabbah that says it straight. Everything that God created in the 6 days of creation needs further work. Afilu adam tzarich tikun, and even human beings on their own need to be fixed. And so this is one really or two really great sources that talk about the need for human beings to improve their very physical beings. Since it's a medical conference, I thought I'd bring this other source, which is a Midrash Shmuel that also brings in Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. Oh, no, sorry, Rabbi Akiva, yeah, and Rabbi Yishmael. They met a farmer who was sick. And the farmer said, "What should I do? I'm sick." They said, "Go to a doctor." He said, "Why should I have a person intervene? God made me sick. God should make me better." And so Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael tell him, "You're a farmer. You have a sickness called hunger. You go and you intervene in God's business and you make food." He says, "The doctor is just like the farmer. Medicine is just like the fertilizer that you use. We need to take control of our world and do everything we can to improve ourselves, including medical interventions." And that brings us back to moral enhancements. So John Loike and Rav Moshe Tendler wrote an article specifically on this issue of moral enhancements, not through AI and brain implants, but through genetic editing. And they wrote as follows: "Tampering with human DNA for medical reasons is included in the biblical directive that people are partners with God in the creation process. The question is, how would halacha address the issue of gene editing to enhance or modify behavioral characteristics?" Exactly our question. At the core of their argument, they bring the Tiferet Yisrael, who says something quite revolutionary. He says, "Shekol davar shelo neida tam leosro mutar hu bli tam." The Tiferet Yisrael says, look, the Torah is very condensed. It only tells us so much, but it tells us all the things we are prohibited. If it doesn't say something is prohibited, we can assume that it is mutar, that it is allowed to be done. And so based on this and some other arguments, they come to the conclusion that we could do, halachically speaking, gene editing to modify behavioral characteristics. The only reason that they say we shouldn't is because we cannot safely predict the outcomes of genetic manipulation. We therefore propose that halacha would prohibit at this time the utilization of gene editing to alter behavioral characteristics because of their unknown far-reaching consequences on the personality of the individual. However, once things become more clear, they're saying that there isn't any specific prohibition to stop you from doing moral enhancements, whether it's genetically, biologically, or through technology like AI and brain implants. The question is, though, maybe it's okay halachically in a technical sense, but is it ethical? Does it really align with Jewish philosophy, with Jewish hashkafa? So you have to understand that moral choice is integral to our free will. The famous Gemara in Brachot says it, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Hakol bidei shamayim chutz mi yirat shamayim. Hakol bidei shamayim chutz mi yirat shamayim means that everything is determined except your free will to determine what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong. That's where you express your free will. You do not express your free will if you're going to have a Coke or a Sprite at lunch today. You express your free will if you're going to steal that Coke or pay for it. That is what the statement is saying. If you don't like my interpretation, I believe you can see it straight in the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchot Shuvah Perek Hey says, Reshut lekol adam netuna. Everybody in the world has free will. Where do you have that free will? Im ratzah la'atot atzmo lederech tova liyot tzaddik hareshut biyado. If you want to be a tzaddik, you can do it. If you want to be a rasha, you can do it. That is where the reshut is natun. And where does even the Rambam bring this whole discussion about free will? In Hilchot Shuvah, in the place that's talking about doing good and putting aside evil. And if that's not enough, in Halacha Gimel, he says, V'davar za ikar gadol. The principle of free will is a fundamental principle. It's an ikar gadol. What does he use the verse to prove that it's an ikar gadol? Re'ei natati lefanecha ayom et ha'chaim ve'et ha'tov, et ha'mavet ve'et hara. he proves that we have free will because God gave us the choice to do good and evil. That's where our free will is. And so if before I go into the question, you don't even have to be a religious Jew actually to understand that moral choice and free will are completely inherently linked. 600 years after the Rambam, so Immanuel Kant basically echoed the Gemara and the Rambam. In his groundwork for metaphysics of morals, he says a free will and a will under moral laws are one and the same. Basically, he's saying, "Kol bidei shamayim chutz miyirat shamayim." There are many. He goes on. The quotes are very difficult to understand from him. I bring for you just a quick quote from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy that talks about Kant's approach, and he says on this view, to act morally is to exercise freedom, and the only way to fully exercise freedom is to act morally. So what the upshot of all this is another article on Kant's writings. To take away from humans their capacity to make wrong choices is an insult to their capacity for choice, the worst kind of affront to their human dignity. I mean, basically what he's saying is that if we put in some kind of moral enhancement that stops me from being able to make moral choices, I've completely violated human beings, their human dignity. Okay, so now before we answer that question and jump to conclusions, is it good or bad, I want to take you a little bit further in this development of transhumanism to posthumanism. You will see that the context will help us to understand the question better. So as I said, posthumanism is about immortality. It's about making a digital mind that runs on a computer. We upload our minds and they run as software on a computer. We live forever. Kurzweil says software-based humans will be vastly extended beyond the severe limitations of humans. As we know them today, they will live out on the web, projecting bodies whenever they need to. We will live forever in some kind of digital simulation. How is this going to work? So Kurzweil explains that there's a thing called patternism. And he says, my personal philosophy remains based on patternism. I am principally a pattern that persists in time. What he's saying is that in our brains, we are basically have these giant neural network where there's all these little neurons that are basically calculation elements that are all connected up by wires. And through those connections, that pattern defines us. You have however many neurons you have, I have however many neurons I have, more or less, and it's the connections, how they're all connected up and how we run them, that basically distinguishes between how you think of things and how I think of things. But that's basically what defines the human being, says Ray Kurzweil. We are our brain pattern. If we can pull that pattern out and put it in a silicon neural network instead of a biological neural network, we can build ourselves again. He says, I am an evolving pattern, meaning these connections keep getting built and all those connections change how I think and who I am. And I can influence the course of the evolution of my pattern by learning and doing, etc. Knowledge is a pattern as distinguished from mere information, and losing knowledge is a profound loss. So he's basically saying like this: there's a difference between information and knowledge. Knowledge is what is inside my brain. Information is what is inside books. So if we take the example that I hope we all can be familiar with, Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha is a piece of information. We transform that into knowledge by learning about it, by thinking about it. The way I think about Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha is different than the way you think about it, is different than the way a non-Jew thinks about it. When I think about Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, so I think about the goy that came to Hillel and said, teach me the whole Torah on one foot, and he gave him the reverse explanation, don't do unto others as you wouldn't want them to do unto you, etc., etc. Because of all those connections to different ideas, those ideas stop being an information in a book and become knowledge in a human being who uses that in different ways. And when the human passes, that knowledge passes, and that is what Ray Kurzweil calls a profound loss that he wants to stop by uploading our brains so that they can continue to work. He is also joined by another big name in the game, Hans Moravec, who says basically that we're patterns. If the process is preserved, I am preserved. It is easy to imagine human thought freed from the bondage of a mortal body. Belief in an afterlife is common, but it is not necessary to adopt a mystical or religious stance to accept the possibility. This is apocalyptic AI, straight in on black and white, or in this case, yellow on blue. In any case, this is apocalyptic AI. Early Jewish and Christian apocalyptic traditions share several basic characteristics which also appear in the 20th century popular science books on robotics and AI. Apocalyptic AI looks forward to a mechanical future in which human beings will upload their minds into machines and enjoy a virtual reality paradise in perfect virtual bodies. So now how close is what Kurzweil and Moravec are talking about to what, say, the Rambam and the Ramban were talking about in living immortally? Now, there are many interpretations of the end of days text, but really the Rambam and the Ramban are the most prominent views on what will happen. Instead of going through the text, I have a little summary here. So the Rambam and the Ramban, they both believe that we are in Olam Hazeh, no machloket here. They both believe that the Mashiach comes, no machloket here. They both believe in Tchiyat HaMeitim, and here becomes the machloket. Because the Rambam says Tchiyat HaMeitim is basically a return to some kind of physical bodies that we recognize today. We live long life like we live today, but just longer. Then we all die just like everybody dies today. And then our spiritual souls go to live in Olam Haba. The Ramban, which by the way is interesting, is the majority opinion. He says Tchiyat HaMeitim is the beginning of Olam Haba, that we do not come back to the bodies that we recognize today. Rather, we come back to kind of gufim dakim, some kind of refined, spiritualized bodies that will house our spiritual selves in Olam Haba. But now that's very interesting, because now that very much parallels what Kurzweil and Moravec were talking about. Some kind of other body that will last us in some kind of other world that we can live for eternity. So on the one hand, it does align with our text, but on the other hand, we have to ask, is this the kind of immortality that the sages, that the prophets, that all of our religious texts have talked about? When we talk about immortality, we talk about transcending the physical world, not staying in the physical world. When we talk about immortality, we talk about connecting with the Ein Sof, not with connecting with the internet. When we talk about mortality, we're not contingent on Amazon servers in a cloud. And when we talk about eternity, we are not dependent on the power not going out. So I would say that all of this is very interesting, and you can make your little apocalyptic AI parallels, but for sure, this is not the immortality that we were looking for, certainly not in Jewish thought. And that brings us to the last phase of this development from transhumanism to posthumanism. The philosophers take it to the no humans. And I bring for you one of the philosophers that talks about it. His name is Eric Dietrich. And Eric Dietrich, he wrote an article several years ago called Homo sapiens 2.0. What is the next version of human beings? So he says as follows: we are morally bounded. We can only be so good, and that isn't so good. Okay, what he's saying is basically what Kohelet said, Ki Adam ein sadik ba'aretz asher yaseh tov v'lo yecheta. People sin. That's just the way it is. There is no human being that doesn't sin. So that's what Eric Dietrich is saying. He's saying we're morally bounded. We don't do more, we don't reach moral perfection. So then he says, so but why should we be around? Because there are things about us worth preserving, art and science to name two. Some might think that these are good parts of humanity to justify our continued existence. This conclusion no doubt used to be warranted before human level AI became a real possibility. Yet now it no longer is warranted. If we could implement in machines the better angels of our nature, then morally we have a duty to, and then we should exit stage left. What he is saying is something like this. People do good things, people do bad things. We used to put up with that because we had no choice. But now we have a choice. We can build machines that don't do bad. And so if we can have beings that only do good, so those beings that also do bad should exit stage left. I mean, basically, he's calling for us to either die out or commit suicide. He's not alone. Hans Moravec also says the same thing. Basically, he says we should pass the torch to the robots. And that's why Francis Fukuyama says transhumanism, which ultimately leads to posthumanism and no humans, is the world's most dangerous idea. Now, this whole discussion about was it worth human beings being around or not, some of you may recognize from the Gemara, right? We talk about this idea to be or not to be. It's a famous Gemara in Eruvin, Daf Yud Gimel Amud Bet, Tanu Rabbanan, Shtei Shanim Umechza Nechlaku Beit Shammai uBeit Hillel Halalu Amrim Noach lo la'adam shelo nivra yoter mishenivra. Halalu omrim noach lo la'adam shenivra yoter mishelo nivra. Beit Shammai says it was a mistake. It would have been better that human beings wouldn't be created. Why? Because they're morally bounded, because they make a mess and it's not worth the trade-off. We don't need the little good they do for all the bad they do. Beit Hillel said, no, it's good. Art and science, or whatever they said, Torah and mitzvot, it's worth it that they do some good, even though they do some bad. They argued about this for 2.5 years. And then, Nimnu v'gamru, they had a vote. Noach lo la'adam shelo nivra yoter mishenivra. And Beit Hillel basically came out on the side of Beit Shammai. It's true, the bad that human beings do does not offset the good they do. They shouldn't have been created. However, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai do not come to the conclusion that Dietrich and Moravec come to. They don't say we should commit suicide. They say we should make the best of what we are today. Achshav shenivra yifashpesh b'ma'asav. People should try to introspect. People should try to do tshuva. People should try to be as good as they can possibly be. This whole argument is echoed in a Midrash Bereshit, where God comes to the angels and says, should we create man or shouldn't we create man? And the angels of Chesed ve'emet nifkashu, Chesed ve'emet nifkashu, Tzedek v'shalom nashaku, Chesed omer yivra shehu gomel chasadim. The angel of Chesed, of kindness, says man should have been created because he does kindness. Ve'emet omer al yivra shekulo shkarim. And the angel of truth said he should not be created because man is full of lies. Tzedek omer yivra shehu oset tzedakot. The angel of justice said man should be created because he does just things or charitable things. Shalom omer lo yivra de klulei ktata. And the angel of peace said he shouldn't be created because he's full of quarrels and wars. In the end, God says, I don't know what you're arguing about. I already created him. The Midrash is expressing exactly the idea that Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai were arguing about. It's expressing the same idea that Dietrich and Moravec were arguing about. Man has a problem because he does good and he does bad. God knew that. God is the one who put the Yetzer Hara in us. This is the whole game of life, is how are we going to deal with this tendency called the Yetzer Hara that brings us to do negative things in the world. God knows that. That's what the game is about. So then, based on this, if that's what the game is about, and God knows this, so then we have no business putting in moral enhancement chips to basically end the game, right? Because if we take away the man's Yetzer Hara through controlling it, through brain chips or gene editing, whatever it is, we have ended the game. On the other hand, maybe that's apocalyptic AI. So what I want to say is just to bring us back to that text that we started with. So the Gemara said, "La'atid lavo mevio hakadosh baruch hu leyetzer hara v'shochato." God comes at the end of days and kills the Yetzer Hara. So, like I said, if we do this, maybe our technology is doing God's work, maybe. But this is the end of the game, right? The Emet Yaakov says, "Zeh de ba'alma de kshot v'lo ba'alma de shikra." That the statement that God is going to kill the Yetzer Hara is talking about the world of lies that we live in. It's talking about the world of truth. Game over. If we kill the Yetzer Hara, that's game over. Now, you could say, okay, fine. So maybe that's what God wants us to do. We're bringing the world to its end. And so we will do it through moral enhancement chips. Could be, but I find it hard to believe on a practical level that we are going to implant moral enhancement chips in every baby before it leaves the hospital upon birth. So I believe that we're not going to use a moral enhancement chips in order to lishchot the Yetzer Hara. However, I would say that we're saying that if you put moral enhancement chips in people, you're taking away their free will. You're basically bringing the end game of creation. So we don't want to do that because that's up to God to do. However, if we've already taken away the free will of people, i.e., criminals that are in jail, maybe we should be putting moral enhancement chips in the criminals. We're not making them any worse off than they were by taking away more free will than they have. And then we could actually release them from prison and close all the prisons. In any case, these are things to think about with our AI future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Navone. We'll have about 5 to 7 minutes of questions if anybody wants to ask Rabbi Navone any questions. Anyone? Okay, we got some.
Thank you for an amazing talk. When we speak about morals, though, what morals will AI have? I mean, I hate to give a more modern analogy. If you look at the way Eretz Yisrael is portrayed in the news, they would take a different sense of morality than we might take. And how is AI going to learn this, and who would be teaching this morals?
Right. Okay. So that's a great question. And it's an open-ended question. Obviously, everybody in this room knows where they're taking their morals from, and outside of the room on the street, the sky's the limit in terms of how people interpret and their own morals. Practically speaking, I believe that governments are going to have to regulate, and governments are going to have to put together think tanks of moral thinkers where they will come to some kind of consensus in each community, in each country. But yeah, AI in general is going to have some kind of values, and those values are critical. You might have heard about what's called the alignment problem. It's a huge problem for AI. If we let AI go off and we give it a task, but we didn't give it any moral constraints, any values that align with our values, so it could do all kinds of crazy things. There's a famous philosopher by the name of Nick Bostrom who gave the paperclip example to make this idea of alignment problem understood. I'm a paperclip factory owner. I want to have as many paperclips made as possible. I tell my machine, make me paperclips. It goes out and takes every piece of metal in the world, and it takes every person, kills them for their energy, and it turns the world into paperclips. See, we forgot to tell it the value of don't steal and don't kill, etc. So this is as a simple example that AI is going to have to learn our values. We're going to have to teach it our values. And then, of course, the problem is whose values, which is what you brought up. And what if we forgot something? The machines are really good at finding the loophole to go around the rules that you gave it. So there's a lot of questions in this, in just what you've brought up in this idea of whose morals are we going to use.
Another question coming.
Thank you. My question is brief. Um, With the economic costs of theoretically placing these enhancements at birth, do you and other philosophers actually see a date? I mean, 2045 is certainly not realistic.
Okay, so I'm not, I mean, you threw in this idea of the date, but at the beginning of your question, if I understood correctly, was more a social question. You know, all of these enhancements are going to cost money, and then that could cause a bifurcation in the society between the haves and the have-nots. I will address that question specifically. There's a great book which I highly recommend. It's by a guy named Kazuo Ishiguro. He won the Nobel Prize for literature, born in Japan, grew up in England, writes obviously Nobel Prize level English. He wrote a book called Clara and the Sun. And in Clara and the Sun, he asks exactly this question. He describes a world that there are wealthy people that are now super enhanced, and they basically can think on levels that regular people can't think. They can act on levels that regular people can't act. And so now there's all the poor people that are completely, rejected from society. And how do we deal with this? So that's sort of a dystopian view of it, that there will be this huge divide between haves and have-nots. On the other hand, I would bring Elon Musk's vision of the future, where he believes that technology is going to bring wealth to the world, and it's going to bring so much wealth to governments that they're going to be able to subsidize all of these kinds of things. And so that will be the social equalizer, and that actually all of these technologies will be available to everybody through government subsidy, as opposed to haves and have-nots. All of this, of course, is conjecture, but it's a good question, and it's definitely a possibility in the negative as well as in the positive.
Okay, that's all the time we have for questions.
Oh,
We have we have a busy schedule, but we want to thank you so much for speaking to us. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Have a good day. Yeah, right now we're going to have a 20-minute break. Everyone's invited to enjoy some of the refreshments in the back. And thank you.